love that theme, but every time I hear it, I feel like a disc jockey that should be introducing the next hit, slew of jazz hits, on a Friday night. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 206. It is Casual Friday. I'm not wearing my usual suit. I'm dressed in plainclothes cop gear tonight for what's going to be the Street Crime Chronicles Part 2. With my next guest, who I'll introduce momentarily. If you haven't checked out the previous episode, that was episode 205, volume 25. The best, the bravest interviews with the FDNY's elite. That was with Jeff Cool. Jeff worked his entire career in the Bronx, first Ladder 19 and then Rescue 3, where his career came to a sudden end when he was injured in the infamous Black Sunday fire of 2005. But even before that, the guy had a heck of a career. And it was good to chronicle it. That went out to the memory of the guys that lost their lives on Black Sunday and the years afterwards. So we go from that, like I said, to the Street Crime Chronicles. You remember that surprise episode that I did with Billy Ryan and Lieutenant Pete Pranzo a little while ago? So I continue with that theme with my next guest, who is a Swiss Army knife within the NYPD, coming on during the very bloody summer of 1985, a bloody decade, really, for the city. His 20 years saw him take down the low-down street scoundrels of New York City as a member of the famed and sorely missed street crime unit for not one, but two stints, first from 1988 to 1993, and again from 1996 to 1997. A veteran with numerous stops within the NYPD's a vast detective bureau where you can go just about anywhere. He's worked in the Robbery Intervention Program, otherwise known as RIP, the 104 Detective Squad. I think that's out in Queens. And the Organized Crime Control Bureau. And that, for the part 2 of the Street Crime Chronicles, is one detective, retired detective, Richard Ficken. Rich, welcome. How are you?
Hey, good evening, Mike. How you doing?
Good. Good to have you. And I see a lot of you in the chat already. I appreciate it. If you have a question for Rich, fire away. I'll make sure I get to it as always. So, Rich, where'd you grow up?
I grew up out in Ronkonkoma, New York. Moved out here probably around kindergarten. And I went to Sachem High School. Kind of good times out there. So away from the city, away from the bustle. And
Right.
I had my dad. My dad was a 110 detective or cop detective throughout my life. So I had someone to kind of look up to and follow in their footsteps.
Yeah, so you had family in the job, and like you said, you also had a cousin that was lieutenant. So it's easy to see where you got the determination to come onto the job. You got on the job in '85. Jerry Kane in the promo when I put it out on LinkedIn mentioned that you guys were rookies together. Freddie Manzolillo, also a friend of mine, who were rookies with him. So tell me about that academy class. Back then, pre-merge, obviously.
All right, yeah, obviously starting out, it was pretty. Just kind of took the test. Wasn't really looking to do it right off the bat, but then I, got called as I was going through the processing. I really got more and more into it. And I was a last minute call up. My academy class started on 7/8, but I wasn't brought in till 7/9 because 50 people didn't show up the first day. So I got a call that night and they said, be back here 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and you're starting. So that was a little bit of a last minute thing. I was at work, got home from work, no cell phones back then. So found out when I got home, I was going to the police academy in the morning. Kind of gave my old boss the shaft by leaving right away, but that's kind of the way they do it.
Yeah, no, of course. I think DeMeo mentioned a while ago, not on this show, that the night before they got into the academy. And I think even for some people, they wait later until they actually graduate. That the night before they're sworn in, they quit their jobs. And, thus begins a journey of a lifetime, at least for 20 years, if not more than that. We're talking with Rich Ficken here. This is going to be part 2 of the Street Crime Chronicles tonight here on the Mike the New Haven podcast. So those patrol years first began in NSU 3, which for those of you that do not know, Neighborhood Stabilization Unit 3 in Midtown Manhattan, which is quite the place to start, especially for a young kid. You're in your 20s at the time. You're eager to do the job. Tell me about that stint.
Yeah, it was awesome. Right after the academy, going out there, that I couldn't believe I was assigned there, and kind of set me up as where I wanted to be as a cop. I didn't know what direction I wanted to go in, what kind of units or details I wanted to be in, and after I was there for 6 months, I knew I wanted to make collars and put away some bad guys.
What is the most notable collar? If I could speak, that'd be great. That you can recall from that time.
From NSU, you know what? I had a really slow start. I was out there. I was eager to make arrests, but it just, didn't happen. We worked, I was on a 6 to 2. So we worked steady shifts, 6 at night to 2 in the morning. So we were pretty much the Times Square detail. It was pretty nice. Started out with nothing. And by the time I left there, I had 43 arrests in NSU in my first 6 months.
43 arrests. And not only are you making these collars, you're going down to court, which had to be an eye opener as well.
Yeah, mostly larcenies and smaller crimes, but it was a good way to learn, and I learned the system, learned how to process arrests, and then that kind of set me up for the rest of my career.
Undoubtedly, given where you would go. So after some time in, of course, the NSU, you went out to Queens, specifically the 104 in Ridgewood. Now, some neighborhoods felt the brunt of the crime wave during that time. Other neighborhoods didn't. They kind of stayed consistent with low crime. Was Ridgewood one of those neighborhoods, or was it hot and heavy during those days?
The funny thing is, everyone was, actually, when I found out I was going there from the academy, I'm like, yeah, you're joking me. There's no 104. I never heard of it. So I was kind of surprised that I was going there, and then everyone was telling me how quiet and how nice it was. But I was able to keep up my collars and even get really into some good felony collars while I was there. So there was crime, wasn't rampant. You had to really work for it and look for it. But if you went out every day looking for it, you could find it.
I think, like with any place in the city during that time, I mean, like I said, so even though some neighborhoods didn't feel it as heavily as others, there was still a collar to be found in a city that was having 1,000, 2,000 homicides plus during that era.
Yeah, it was. Stolen cars were big, commercial burglaries, things along those lines, and there were some pretty good robberies along the way that I got involved with. So worked with an old timer for a little while, Charlie Hoskins, and he taught me about the GLAs, the stolen cars. Learn how to find them. Back then, you can actually kind of chase them. You just had to do it the right way. And we were ripping all into Brooklyn because we bordered the 8-3. We spent a lot of time on the border over there. Right. So working those areas, and the car thieves were running through there pretty heavy.
Some guys, and I was covering this last episode with Jeff, talking about the fire department structure, and I was saying this to him, and I'll say this again. In the PD and the FD, you could stay, in the patrol bureau, or if you're a fireman, just strictly a fireman, never move up in the ranks and have more than your fair share of fun and adventure during a 20-year career minimum, in a city like New York. But obviously, as we'll talk about as we go, you moved up in the ranks. Did you always have aspirations, especially given the fact that, like you said, your cousin was a lieutenant, to move up in the ranks, specifically to get to the detective bureau?
My dad was a detective by the time he had just retired 2 years before I got on. So detective was kind of the goal I was looking for. Took like my first 2 sergeant's tests, and then the first 2 just kind of just missed. Got a little frustrated with that and just said, you know what, I want to be a detective, and I want to get there as quick as I can. And figured collaring and keeping busy was the best way to get there.
No, and you were absolutely right, because you would get there. Rich Ficken's our guest. This is the Street Crime Chronicles Part 2. And I see Lieutenant Pranzo in the chat. Thank you for watching. Portia's better half is also in the chat. Thanks to everybody else that's here. You, Dizzy, Darren Phillips, and I see Alicia B as well. Thanks, guys, for tuning in. And if I missed you, thank you for watching. You're definitely appreciated as well. So that said, of course, I always like to ask this, strictly looking at one's patrol career before they moved on in the ranks. When you look back at that time, of course, life in the RMP is quite unique. Sometimes the crime finds you. Sometimes, as you said, you find the crime. What's the most dangerous moment from the patrol years that you can recall?
You know what? Not really a lot of danger. I mean, I've had some robbery arrests and things like that. I mean, some ones that really kind of stand out to me is and I had a captain, was Captain Lawless at the time, and I really wanted to move up to anti-crime, and I was probably had the most collars in the precinct. And he kept moving up, older guys that really, in my opinion, weren't as active or as knowledgeable about what was going on out there. And, even only having less than 3 years, I was still pretty frustrated and kind of wanted to get there. And, had a couple of talks with him about going there. And he's like, I don't put anyone in until they have 3 years. And, that kind of pushed me to kind of go for my street crime interview. But I mean, like some of the collars I had right there, he did eventually put me into a late tour burglary car. And if we had an extra sergeant, we were in plain clothes. So we were kind of like anti-crime on the midnights.
I have to point this out. And I'm glad that Darren picked up on this. Captain Lawless. That's quite ironic.
Yeah, right. Nice name.
I know.
He went on to be like a commanding officer of the academy at some point, and he had moved up the job. But we just kind of always disagreed because I thought I should have been a little bit treated a little better there for what I did, and he was like, well, kind of looked at me as like maybe like a young and crazy guy, but I was pretty serious about what I was doing.
No, I could tell.
Yeah. So one night I was working with Patty Collins. We didn't have a boss that night, so we're in full uniform, but we're in an unmarked car, and we're cruising around on a late tour, and notice a guy walking down Myrtle Avenue, kind of from Brooklyn, heading from the Brooklyn end towards Queens. We sat back on and watched him a little bit, and I realized he was following a female that was walking about a half a block ahead. And he'd stayed behind her for a while, and I'd stayed way back. And I mean, back then I had binoculars in the car, and we would park in the car and watching him from a distance, driving around, getting ahead of him, watching him from the opposite angle for a little while till they passed. The woman had made a turn down a quiet street, and I saw him immediately make the turn after her, and I knew what was going to happen. So I had taken off my uniform jacket, took off my shirt, left it in the car. Was just kind of standing out there in a T-shirt, started walking up on him, and he disappeared around the corner to the other side. By the time I caught up to him, he had her choked out unconscious, and he was ripping rings off her finger. It ended up that she was a civilian that worked for corrections, and kind of caught him right in the act there. So, I mean, that's a uniform collar that, you don't see too often. And that's kind of, some of the things that kind of got me moving towards that street crime direction. Started realizing, you can do good things out there.
Especially during that time. And you got there in 1988. And I think, and Pete Pranzo in the chat, you recognize this, I'm sure. People forget. And for those of you that have forgotten or don't know, 1988 was a really violent year for cops. 7 of them were killed. 6 of them were shot and killed, specifically in the line of duty. And Hoban and Busick, that was the year they were both shot and killed in separate incidents on the same day. And one of the more dangerous units in SOD is street crime. And you went there, but then again, you need an active cop. You need somebody who's not afraid to make the collars, as evidenced by that collar that you just mentioned. So they spotted you, they put you in there. Some guys get in there on that. Some guys get in there because they have a hook. But listen, if you can do good work, it doesn't matter.
My dad was in there, but at the time, I don't think anyone was left that kind of knew him. My dad he went there for 2 years, like when they first started street crime. He went from the 110 to there. He kind of thought back then it was kind of like a little bit of a hook gig, and not really. He didn't think, he didn't realize what it was going to be, and he bailed out and went back to the 110. Did his anti-crime there, and then made detective and went up to the squad in the 110. So he did his whole career in the 110. For myself, that kind of gave me the direction. So so I went in and went for my interview, and going to the 104 was the best thing for me because they saw my arrest activity and they said, if you can do that in the 104, you're going to be amazing here.
Right. So
street crime, when I first got there, I was doing the late tours, the B squad. We worked 9:30 at night to 6 in the morning. Had a great boss, Sean Zaboris. Really loved teamwork. So if anyone saw anything, we were getting on the radio with each other. We'd have all the cars, setting up. We'd be working on people, kind of setting up a perimeter around where they're working and waiting to take them down. And it was kind of started out, when I got there, the guns were always big in street crime, but they weren't everything. When I first got there, robberies were still key, and that's kind of where my specialty was, and that's where I kind of excelled. I have my share of gun collars, obviously, because we're working all over the city, and you're going to get them. But I was pretty much a robbery guy. I knew that was my direction, and being there in street crime, working the midnights, we would do weekends back in Midtown, so I was back to my old stomping grounds from NSU, so I had a good idea of where I was and what was going on. And kind of slid over that way. But the interview process was good back then, went in, talked to them, and they were like, we'd love to have you. In December of 88, got the call and went over there.
And back then, you were really hiding in plain sight, in a unit like street crime. And I've covered this with guys who were in the unit before, and that especially for guys like yourself. And I'm not saying this to put you down or anything like that. It's easier for somebody that looks like me, for example, you know what I'm going with this, to blend into a certain neighborhood. And these guys, especially the bad guys, even though they're making dumb choices, not all of them are dumb people. They know a cop when they see one. And now,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, that's the kind of the difficult thing with it. So how would you blend in?
But I grew out a full beard. I had hair down past my shoulders.
Ah.
And I would just, and it was funny too. If I cut my hair, all of a sudden I wouldn't see things. And then as soon as my hair got long again, all of a sudden I'd start seeing things. Because I guess, the guys were looking out a little bit for you. And once you didn't look like, I even had people come up and say, "Hello, officer." And I said, "What?" And they just kept walking. And later on, they would actually rob someone in front of me. They were trying to check me out. And they kind of thought about it. But in the end, they blew it off. Mm. So just having that look, kind of got me in a little more of an edge.
Right. Because you need, and that's the unique thing about a unit like, or if you're working in a narcotics unit, make an undercover buy and bust, same thing, is that you guys can kind of be, and I don't say this, and sometimes it has a negative connotation because you don't want cops to go out there and act like this. But I say it polar opposite, lovingly. You could be cowboys in uniform, and what I mean by that is not acting nuts, but not looking like the conventional cop. And those are the guys, those are your hard chargers, those are the ones doing the best police work.
Yeah, and I give a lot of credit. There was a guy named Burt Rapp. He wrote a physical surveillance book. And I had just finished reading that book before I went there. And that taught me a lot about surveillance and following people and not blowing your cover, not letting them know that you're there. Even if they do make you, don't get frustrated. They didn't. They might just be thinking about it. Doesn't mean they know it. And that really helped me a long way with that. So that was, that was like my little bit of a study guide that really got me into watching people and watching things.
Don't give me tricks of the trade, because obviously we're not trying to compromise the guys that are out there now, but there are different methods. You don't stick to the same one. It's not like Mariano Rivera, to use a baseball analogy. The guy just threw the cutter his whole career, and good for him. It worked out for him, but most people have different things that they go to. So for you personally, and again, don't give the trade secrets away, what were the methods that you will alternate between in order to make sure you stay fresh out there?
Yeah, some of the things too is sometimes you can spot the perpetrator, the bad guy. He's out there. He's moving at a different pace from everybody else. He's hustling. He's definitely looking to do something.
Maybe he's got a bulge too in his waist.
Yeah, if you're looking for guns, absolutely. He keeps adjusting it, keeps moving it around. Things like that kind of give it away. The robbery guys, they're walking at a different pace because they're trying to catch up with things. So they're walking a little faster than everybody else. And you kind of watch them and you see them doing that. And then you lock on. And then sometimes I'd see the perp first. And other times I would see the victim. I'd see the guy walking in Midtown, heading towards, from the center of Midtown, kind of working to the outskirts. And, he's a little drunk. He's not all there. And I'm like, oh, this guy is prime bait. And I would follow the victim. We did that one day down around 38th Street. We followed this guy all the way up to the front of Radio City. 3 guys started following about halfway. We were following for about 20 minutes until these guys picked up on him. All of a sudden, 3 guys picked up on him. He walked to the past the front of Radio City, which now it's early in the morning. Nobody out there. They had knocked him down the subway stairs, and that was a subway entrance, one of those ones that was exit only. So once they knocked him down the stairs, he had nowhere to go. I mean, we went running in, and luckily for us, now they were kind of in jail already. Once we pulled up on the scene, one or two of them had got out before. Out of the 3 of them. So we had a little bit of foot pursuit, but the 3rd guy was grabbed right in the stairway. And again, we went down the stairs. As we start turning the corner, you see the guy's shoes on the stairs. His jacket's ripped off on the stairs. And then you get to the bottom and you realize, you definitely had that robbery happen. And that was kind of the hardest part of that job, is I had to let my victim kind of take a beating. And that was kind of tough, Do you really want, you want the arrest, but you really don't want someone to get, seriously injured. But we were kind of working that fine line and, but until they did something, you really had nothing on them.
That's the key. You can't, and of course you can read certain patterns as a cop, but until they do something, That's the key thing. And Joe Maliga in the chat brings up something that I was going to ask you. You read my mind, Joe, because I remember the transit police used to have decoys back in the day. Same thing. They'd have a guy pretend he was drunk, or they'd have a lady, walk around and kind of look like she was high on something, but it was really undercover. And they'd go in and make the bust. And once they grab something off the decoy, I imagine street crime employed the same tactics. Did you ever do that yourself?
We had done it. We brought it back. Street crime had done it earlier, before the 80s, early 80s. And then they kind of cut back on it, and they just started bringing it back. I would say about halfway in there, maybe around 90, maybe 89. They brought it back a little bit, and we started doing a little bit of it. And that was great too, because you get to see the whole thing. You got your guy out there, you're watching people come up to him. Now you're learning like what the bad guy's talking to him. And then they would go through his pockets, while he was there. We'd have the guy, a lot of times he'd have a long coat on, and we'd put he'd have like a checkbook or something in his pockets, and they'd be up there. Oh, buddy, you all right? They'd be patting him on the back, sticking their hands in his pockets, pulling out what they had. And then we'd take him down afterwards. And he's like, no, man, he goes, the guy's drunk. I was just helping him out, trying to get him to the subway, this and that. And meanwhile, we already knew he was a cop, but we never really gave it up to them. We let it go to court until it kind of got out. Some teams, they kind of let the guy know right away. I always like to just let that be the surprise for later.
Right. No, and it was so good. It was so well done.
Yeah. We had a guy who worked with us, Eddie Callahan, older guy, a little bald. He could go out there, and he didn't look like a cop at all. And it was a great thing for him. He went out there, did it a couple times. And I think a couple times he didn't even know he was robbed. And it was pretty good, pickpocketed or whatever, So the grand larceny would go. It wouldn't always be a robbery. But we had the team out there making sure he was safe.
I'll talk about 90 in a second, because that really was the bloodiest year. But, even though the case, as far as building a case, I mean, you guys have a little bit of a hand in it. The detective bureau, other aspects of the detective bureau, I should say, is more active in actually building the case, putting the guy away or the gal away. But, enough times of doing this, even though you guys shift around as a citywide unit, you feel like you're starting to make a difference in a neighborhood, I imagine. You feel like you're, dare I say, taking the neighborhood back.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, Midtown Manhattan, we were there if it was a weekend, we were working nights. We worked Midtown Manhattan for street crime. During the week, we'd work the other boroughs, but our team, if it was a weekend, we were working in Midtown, and that's the wolf packs were going on back then.
Happening today.
One night I'm out there working with a new guy in the unit, a guy named Bill Hardcastle, young guy in the unit, and we're going around, and we see a group of 10 guys, 10 kids walking around. And I said, all right, let's follow them. Followed them for 2 hours. Finally, a drunk guy, a tourist, came out wearing some nice jewelry, well-dressed. They followed him up like 52nd and Broadway, followed him north on Broadway. About 57th Street, they jumped him, pummeled him, robbed him. By the time we got up on him, the crew was already running away. I was calling cars in to back us up at the point. They kind of took them down pretty quick. I didn't have everybody in place. So they ran down into Columbus Circle to the subway. And all 10 of them were sitting on the bench waiting for the train. So me and Bill walked down there in plain clothes. I said, Bill, stay behind me. You don't pass them. I'm going to walk past them on the platform. And then as soon as I walk past, I'm going to turn around. ID myself. You do it at the same time. And we were able to take down all 10 of them right on the platform without incident. And there was only 2 of us there. The other parts of the team weren't there till a little bit later. But they were caught. They had nowhere to go. I mean, other than if they wanted to run down the tracks, they probably could have. But they were so surprised that we kind of got them right there.
And even if you needed backup, I mean, you could have had transit right there to help you out, because their TPF would ride the train. So if it came to that, I'm sure obviously you'd be fine either way.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And actually, another thing comes to mind while we're on the transit. I was down on 34th Street down by Macy's one evening, and we saw a guy get his wallet pickpocketed right in front of us. So take off after the perp. Of course, he goes down in the hole. Me and my partner chased him from 34th Street all the way to 42nd Street in the hole. Lost radio communication. I told the transit booth people as I was going down, we're going in. I thought they would shut the tracks down. Guess what? Didn't happen. There were trains rolling by us while we were running through there. Luckily, there were so many tracks down there, we were able to get out of the way of some of these trains. Eventually, the suspect went past the moving train, an incoming train. I had to wait for it to go by, and we lost him. But I did recover the victim's wallet.
Wow, and that's with the third rail too. You accidentally step on the third rail. That's.
I got back. My boss wanted to kill me. He's like, "What do you think you're doing? You can't do that." And I'm like, "You got to get this guy," And but again, a little young, maybe a little crazy, but these were the lengths we went to back then. I mean, we were taking these guys. It was serious. We wanted to put them away.
Yeah, that's the real police right there. My God.
Back there too. I mean, they didn't have the RIP units yet, so when you had these arrests, they had the what they called CCIU, the criminal. What was it? Investigation unit. So if it was like a recidivist, if it was a guy who was a bad criminal,
right?
They would call you up and say, "Hey, listen, this guy's a bad guy you got today, and we want to come down and enhance your case." So I got to work with a lot of them on a lot of my cases because a lot of the guys I got were recidivists, and they would kind of help you polish it up and get it ready for court. They would interview the guys, get statements, do things like that. So I learned a lot about interviewing people from them. Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, career criminal investigation unit. That's what it was.
Ah, okay. I've heard of that. Yeah, CCIU. And it's funny because, I do remember some of the guys from emergency service telling me that they would have people that would run down the subways and that they would have to slap some Scott packs on because it is a tunnel and go down there with flashlights looking for them. But I've never actually heard of like street crime guys or anybody from any other unit besides ESU actually going and chasing somebody down the rails. You can make that. That's like a movie scene. It's kind of like the French Connection.
Yeah.
But on a track.
We made it all the way to 42nd, and then we got up. We had to walk the street all the way back to get to our car, which was back down on 34th Street. But my lieutenant was down there, and they were looking for us, and they were livid. But and I understand it now.
Of course.
I obviously wouldn't want to do it then, but back then, that's the extent of chasing people.
But that LT, once he was done chewing you guys out, he
loved what we did, absolutely.
Right.
But
he had to love it.
He couldn't let us do it again.
Right. No, of course. He has to live.
God forbid if one of us got hurt down there. That would have been
right. Would have been
not
terrible.
worth it. Not worth it for what it was.
Oh, but at least he got the victim's property back.
Yeah, and that was my saving grace. I'm like, look, I got the guy's wallet back right here. He had dropped it while we were chasing him.
My guy Patty Pogan from Emergency Services in the chat. Patty, you probably had to look for a perp down the subway tunnel many a time, my friend. So good to see you. Thanks for tuning in tonight. So from there, and of course, like 1990, I mentioned, was the bloodiest year. It was 2,000 plus homicides. And it was to say, by the work of what street crime was doing back then, that number could have been 3,000. You guys might have stopped even a few homicides. You get somebody who's trying to rob somebody. We've seen it happen. They go too far and beating the guy or the gal down. They beat him to death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had 1990. I have quite a few robberies with weapons. I had 2 commercial bodega robberies in Midtown. One was around Christmas time. Guy robbed the bodega at gunpoint. We had picked him up running away from the scene, started following him. The job comes over that he had robbed somebody, and we ended up taking him down and pulling the gun off him right in front of the Christmas tree. Right, he was going into that crowd to kind of disappear, but we had picked up on him on the way in, kind of running before he started to walk in the crowd. And then again, the street crime thing was, listen, don't let him know you're there. Just kind of creep up on him, walk up on him in the crowd once he slowed down, and boom, take him down without incident. You challenge that guy or let him know you're coming from a distance. And he has a chance to get that gun with all those people around. That wouldn't be a good thing. Right.
No, of course, there has to be common sense. Yeah.
We walk up, one of us on each side, each grab an arm, boom, put him right to the ground. He didn't know what was going on. It was a good time back then. Absolutely. And the other bodega robbery was 8th Avenue, probably around 50th Street. Was what I call the multinational team. It was, I know nowadays talking about what people's race are, you can't even put it over the radio anymore. Tell people who did it, but it was an Asian, a Black, and 2 Hispanics that And this was a pattern. This was their 10th robbery in Midtown Manhattan. And again, picked up on them right after the robbery, driving away. They're in a car. They're from the Bronx, and took them down at like 5, 2, and 6. Had another car come up, cut them off, and took them out of the car without incident. Gun recovered in the car. All the property from the robbery. There was a lot of good things going on back then. I used to love doing that kind of work.
Even though you're not happy about the high crime rate, it does keep you guys in business. It does keep you guys active. And those are really some of the cities. If you look at New York back then, if you look at Detroit, if you look at Chicago, those are the cities were really some of the best officers because they have so much practice, basically, for lack of a better way to word it, with these kinds of crimes. They get so good at stopping them.
Yeah. So, that was, we had some good times back then. Mm-hmm. Again, now going up to the Bronx, now we're in a whole nother place. Trying to think where we are, probably in the 4-2. I have a guy go into to do a robbery in a car wash with a gun. Goes in, pulls the gun. Worker in the car wash comes out with a machete, wields the machete, catches the guy right on the trigger finger, right along the gun hand. His index finger and the gun were left at the scene. Perp fled. No robbery done. So now what do? All the patrol cars come. They're taking reports. They're looking at everything. I'm looking at a dead-end block down the street. I see a car parked down there. I'm like, that car doesn't belong here. Sat on that car for 3 hours. Guess what? A little later on, someone comes up, picks up that car. All right. Do you stop the guy going to the car? No, you don't know what you have yet. Guy gets in the car. We follow the car. Goes up to an apartment building, beeps the horn. Guy comes out with his hand wrapped in a towel. Jumps in the car. He was getting ready to take him to the hospital. Next thing I know, I got the perp. We already had his finger, so we got his prints, I'm sure. And next thing I'm sitting in the reattachment center up in the Bronx. And that was probably my first taste of I did a little bit of surgery that night. It was so busy up there. The doctor's like, can you do me a favor and hold this clamp while I just pull some of these bone chips out of there? And that was a kind of crazy time.
It's not headless body and topless bar, but it's close.
Yeah. So the doctor's like, are you squeamish? She's like, no. He said, you mind holding this clamp for me? I just got to try and get this out. So the funny thing there is, so the doctor is looking at the finger, trying to figure out how he can do a reattachment. And the nurse is behind the person who the doctor's working on the finger. And she's shaking her head no, going like this. Don't put it back. It's his trigger finger. And the doctor's looking at her like, what the heck? So, a little bit of a comical moment. It ends up they did not reattach his finger. So, and not because they didn't want to give it to him, because they couldn't do it. There was some complications in there.
He didn't need it anyway. He wasn't using it for much good. I do have some questions in the chat. There's 4 of them, as a matter of fact. I'll start off with Steve-O, who's a retired NYPD lieutenant. And he asked, while in street crime, how are the interactions with precinct anti-crime teams?
You know what? Some of the teams were good, and some of them kind of didn't like us being there. Again, there's only a limited supply of what's out there, although back then there was plenty. We got along with some of them pretty good, and some of them not so good. And even some of the precincts, we went into the desk, and they weren't the happiest people for us being there. So like a lot of times our boss would come in, he would log our prisoners in at the desk, and we'd go do our own thing. Kind of kept us separate from the precinct guys. Yeah, we had some people, didn't really care for us. And again, like I said, I took a bunch of good robberies there that, I don't know, could another anti-crime cop maybe made those arrests? Possibly.
That's ultimately what it boils down to. You want to be the guy, the man or the woman.
So, we're always looking at poachers in someone else's neighborhood.
Because it's a citywide unit, it was part of SOD back then, which for those of you that don't know, Special Operations Division. And that's the thing. You look at most SOD teams, people, when they call emergency service, they're happy to see emergency service, or other citywide units like the Bomb Squad, for example, my miniseries on those guys. People are more than happy to come let the Bomb Squad do whatever it is that they may need. street, when you're talking about taking potentially, as you just said, other people's arrest, it makes sense to an extent why they would have that gripe. Not that I'm saying it's right, because if you're going to be in a precinct anti-crime team, or if you're going to be in street crime, you got to have a type A personality.
Yeah.
You got to be a hard charger. Otherwise, why are you there?
Yeah. And like some of the things there, I understand some of it. And like the precinct cops would have to go to the scene where it happened. And so we were kind of free to kind of say, okay, where's this car heading? Where can I pick this guy up? Or where's he running to? And, I didn't have to respond to the scene to get to the victim. So I would think about, okay, where did this happen? Where's the suspect most likely going? And then we'd be picking them up there. So people are like, well, now you're picking up a guy off of our radio run, our job. Yeah, but we picked them up and you didn't, so.
Finders keepers.
Yeah. So it's like, well, I'm doing all the paperwork and you're doing, so I said, no, I'll get all the paperwork. I don't mind doing that.
There you go. It evens out.
Yeah. Some people took it hard.
Well, that's their loss, Hey, listen, like I said, exactly.
Well, I look at it, we're all out there for the same job. If you can bring in, bring it in.
Exactly. As long as the collars are being made.
Yeah. And, like I said, some of the guys, we went out. Some of the busier commands liked us. Some of them did, same thing there. It was good and bad. But I got to see the whole city. Another collar down in the 6-8, right? Another quiet place. They have that little Lover's Lane. What is that? Shore. I'm not sure. It's Shore Avenue, Shore Road down there. Little Lover's Lane. Guy and a girl making out on the car. Two guys come up at knife point, rob them, take the car, catch those guys. A couple blocks away, we got them in the car with the knife, with the property. Again, another CCIU enhancement. Worked all night with them because they were looking at these guys for some other things. And, again, just got some more investigative experience from doing those kind of collars. But that whenever we went to the 6-8, a lot of guys said, well, it's a night off because we're not getting anything. But I never really had that attitude. I always had that attitude that, you know what, keep your nose grinding and you'll come up with something.
It's a good attitude to have. It contributes to consistency in any profession, but especially in a profession like that one, in which life and death can happen in a moment. And we've seen it happen many times, not just in New York. It seems like everything is going normally, and then it flips on a dime like that as soon as you snap your fingers.
Yeah, and again, the good thing for me then, I wasn't married yet, so I could keep my nose to the grindstone. I really can tell you, I didn't have many nights in street crime where I said, I'm taking a night off. I'm not making an arrest tonight. I could still make an arrest and give it to one of the other guys if we had to. But most of the time I wouldn't even want to do that. If I'm going to get it, I'm going to get it. So that was a lot of dedication, a lot of time put into that. A lot of people don't realize that.
And the other question that I have here is of course, from Steve Soslavsky, and it's much in the same theme in regards to the precinct anti-crime teams. He wants to know what your interactions were like with the assistant district attorneys. They loved me. Coming in there with rock solid robbery arrests. And again, there were some people that said, a street crime robbery. And I would be like, no, a real robbery. Because some people would say, street crime would say like a guy, two guys fighting over a bottle and the guy dropped $1 and someone picked it up. It's a robbery. But I was going in there with good cases. Matty Bogdanos, really good DA down there. If I was going down and Matty's team was catching, I'd call Matty up and say, Matty, listen, I got a good one coming down. And I'd try and work with the same trial bureaus as much as I could. And again, I had a DA like him who wouldn't plea anything out. So we're gonna put this guy in and we're gonna hammer him for this robbery. We had a robbery up in the 3-4. And they say like up there, a lot of things, drug ripoffs and stuff like that. Wasn't it? I don't know, but this guy was up there with a lot of money and he got taken. He did live up there. What was he doing with the money? I don't know. But we went, we had 3 perps on that case. And Matty wouldn't give up on that case. He was trying them all the way.
by the time we prosecuted that case, 2 of them were already dead in shootings.
Of course.
One up in a drive-by up in White Plains, and one somewhere else in the city. So these were some bad dudes.
Yeah. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. I'm sure nobody was crying tears for them.
Yeah, I was working with what was that, Richie Diaz on that one. So, but Matty brought us back. He would bring us down like, every month and a half, just to keep us up on things, make sure the complainants were still around, keeping these cases ready for prosecution. So we worked pretty hard with them too.
Mm-hmm.
So he'd bring us out and say, "Listen, go up there and see if you can find this witness." And we'd go up and we'd go talk to the guy and make sure he was still around, make sure he was okay, and kind of stayed with the case, which a lot of guys don't do.
No, and some guys get frustrated and they kick the can down the road, and that leads, I guess, perfectly into the next few questions that I have here in the chat. 2 of them come from Alicia B, and then Stu, I'll get to your questions as well. Alicia B, speaking of cases, she wants to know your thoughts on the off-duty officer who was attacked in the Bronx. Do you think we'll see an arrest soon of those 4 gentlemen? She asked.
I can only hope. Like I said, with all the video stuff that's out there these days, and hopefully we have information on these perps that we can grab these guys and get them away for that.
Mm-hmm. Hopefully, and we hope that officer recovers too quickly.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing, that all the things that are available to these detectives now, if I had half of them when I was back there, it would be amazing what we can do.
No, of course.
I watch these guys put together things, and it's a lot of work. Don't get me wrong; these guys are putting in a lot of work, just going out, finding those videos, banging on all these doors, talking to all these people, getting that information, and IDing these guys. It's really a lot of footwork now, but they're not giving up on that cause, and they're grabbing these guys.
And Alicia B also wants to know: have you considered writing a book about your career?
To me, I kind of think it was kind of average. I mean, I know I did some pretty cool things, but I don't know if there's enough there to really put it all down. Although if I sat with the right person, talked about it enough, things like this, where you start thinking about all these things again, things are coming up. Maybe there's a little bit in there.
And the last question comes from Stu Kelsall. He wants to know, obviously, you had a lot of great moments as we're discussing tonight in your 20-year career. What was the most frustrating part, he asked?
Frustrating part was kind of, sometimes fighting the administration. You're out there making these collars and they don't want you, doing certain things. When you're in street crime and you have the pressure to make those collars every month, and you have a month where for some reason you just don't hit anything. And now you get a maybe a stolen car, which for street crime was kind of a negative thing. Do you take it or do you not? It's a crime.
Right.
Is it our area? Not really. But you'd make a call. We had a boss that was running street crime at the time. He said, "Listen," he goes, "you guys want to stop cars? I'll send you the highway." He thought we should get everything on the street. He didn't want us doing anything with cars. I mean, at one point they made us. It was only for like a couple of months, that if we did a stop on a vehicle, he wanted to make sure we had the red, little cherry light on top of the car, and he wanted us to put on these reflective vests when we got out of the car. So he was doing everything he could to kind of deter us from messing with the cars. And he really wasn't even crazy about taking guns out of cars. We had a guy who took 21 guns out of a car by the Port Authority. And he even gave him crap for, what are you messing with the cars for? But you look at all the guns he got out of there.
Yeah. Certain guys, they feel.
But that was a boss, I think, that was put in there early, maybe to kind of kill street crime. They put this D.I. Kelly in there, and he wasn't really the guy you wanted. Once he got out of the way, then we started going forward again.
Are you referring to Ray?
No. It's
different Kelly. Okay.
Steve Kelly. Steve Kelly was his name, and everyone said he was there to shut us down.
Yeah, it's a unit that was done away with officially in 2002, and it has not made its return since. And I understand that there were things, obviously, that happened along the way that were not good. Everybody remembers Diallo in 1999, which was terrible. But I think as not to get too deep into it, They made it a reflection of the entire unit, which I don't think was a good route to go either, but that's not for us to litigate here tonight. So, of course, you spent some time, extensive time in the Detective Bureau as well, outside of street crime, in your 2 stints from 88 to 93 and also 96 to 97. And you went into the RIP, and the RIP is kind of in the same vein as street crime. When you're talking about, it's obviously not completely the same, but you're targeting robbery patterns. You're going after these guys. I imagine that fit like a glove for you.
Yeah, and it actually came at a good time for me because I had my 4 years in street crime. I was coming up, on the end of my 4th year. And I had heard that they were doing, narcotics and RIP interviews. And I did not want to go to narcotics at all at the time. I didn't want to go to a CCB. I definitely wanted to go to a RIP. And it's another funny circumstances. Like I said, the universe kind of looks out for you sometimes.
Right.
So I had to do a day tour for something at street crime. I had court or something, and I got done early, and I went back to the base. And there was a sergeant there, and he was going down to 1PP to deliver the list of who should have a RIP interview. And I'm driving him down there, and I wasn't on the list. While we were driving down there, I had an opportunity to tell him that I had probably the most robbery arrests in street crime at the time, and how many I had, and I had a chance to kind of show my case. Again, because your administrative staff from the day tour isn't really up on what the guys are doing at night. And I think he was really surprised. I think if he knew I had all of that, he probably would have put me on that list. But then he did. And then I went to my RIP interview, and I had extensive paperwork on all my suspects. My dad had started this thing when he was a cop. It was a rubber stamp, an old ink pad. And it was a stamp, and he would stamp it in a book, and it would say the perp, the docket number, the arrest date, description of what happened, and you'd stamp them in this book. So I had a book on every arrest that I had made. Where it is today, I don't know. I lost it somewhere. When I went into the Detective Bureau, I kind of stopped doing all that work.
No.
But so when I went into my RIP interview and I pulled out this book and I'm like, here's all my cases and here's all the documentation. They were like, oh my God, this guy's excellent on the paperwork. He'll be here. Next thing I heard is you aced it and you'll be one of the first ones to go. So what happened then is all the OCCB guys got picked up first. And now I was kind of bummed. I'm like, that was my shot out of here. I'm still here. And am I really going to get this RIP thing? But then sure enough, right after that, I found out January 3rd, I was going to the 7-3 RIP down in Brownsville.
Which was a great place to work during that time.
Which was a hustle and bustle back then too, yeah.
Yeah. You always went where the action was. You were a magnet for the action. Yeah,
and it's like something just steered me, kind of steered me in that direction. At that point, I was living in, I moved back into Queens. I was living in Kew Gardens. So, that's a quick hop right on the Interborough. Not even, a few miles away and into Brooklyn. So I was in a busy place, but yet I was close enough to get back and forth. And it was a good thing for me there too. Yeah, I really enjoyed working there.
What's interesting, of course, is that later on you went to the gang unit. You had a separate stint in street crime, of course, that we'll touch on briefly from 96 to 97. And that was another tough time because obviously we mentioned Diallo, that came 2 years later, but this was when Kevin Gillespie was killed in the line of duty. And he never even got out the box. I mean, as soon as he stepped out the car, these animals just opened fire on those guys and Kevin was killed. So, coming in during that time, when you had such a good guy, he started out bad in life. His mom said he wasn't the best kid growing up. He gave her fits. He got his life in order, joined the police department, housing originally, I believe, came over upon the merge, just to die like that on that night in the Bronx. So what do you remember most about that time?
I'll tell you exactly. This is going to be directly in line with that. I was working again in the 7-3. Again, time to start looking to move on. We had merged with housing at the time. So you think, you're merging with housing. You're going to get all the housing detectives, and you're going to get your guys. And you're going to work together, and it's going to be great. Well, all these housing guys start disappearing the details. Now with all the extra personnel, all the good personnel in the 7-3 was launching out to the homicide squad. And I'm working with guys, with the same or less time than me, even in the squad. So, where's your guys to learn from? They had just came out with Comstat. You're trying to move 300 cases, and they want instantaneous information on everything. So that was kind of my end of, my love with the Detective Bureau. I mean, some guys go there and they love it. I'm a street guy. That paperwork and doing all that stuff was not really for me. I mean, follow-up investigations were great, but there was a lot of nonsense too that I just didn't want to be bothered with.
Doesn't surprise me.
So at the time, all of a sudden, I get a call from Captain Savage over at Street Crime. He said, "Rich," he goes, "we're putting together a group of detectives. We're going to bring back 20 detectives, and we're making 2 units." I said, "Okay, 1 unit we want them to debrief prisoners and get search warrants, and the other unit is kind of work with the robbery squads and do the robbery stuff." So, me being the robbery guy, I'm like, "Oh, that's right up my alley. That's what I would love to do." But I got put in more of the warrant end of it. So going back, I didn't get exactly what I wanted, but I went to a good thing. I mean, the 10 guys I worked with there, I think we did 111 search warrants in 11 months before they disbanded us. So we went back for 11 months to Street Crime. Now, we weren't doing the warrants. We were getting the warrants. Obviously, CSU was doing it for us because we weren't able to do our own because we were actually detectives, but under patrol there.
Right.
But I had a great opportunity there to watch ESU work because we would be on all the warrants. A lot of times we would do, pick up a perimeter if they didn't have enough people, or, I'd drive up in the truck. I'd ID the door. I say, "Yeah, that's the door," to make sure they got the right door. So I got to work with some of those guys pretty good, the A team.
Yeah.
So I had a couple of people I worked with earlier in my career that were there at the time, and that was pretty good doing that. So we were pretty active. So getting to the Kevin Gillespie part of it. So obviously I tell Captain Savage, "Yeah, I'm coming back." I walk into Street Crime my first day back. The first guy to greet me in the door was Kevin Gillespie. He says, "Hey, how you doing? Glad to see you guys. Well, love to have you guys aboard." And I talked to him for a little while. He told me a little about himself. I talked to him a little bit. And that was my first interaction. The first person I saw walking back in the door at the old Street Crime base. So come back to that day in March. We were out reconning a warrant that we were going to hit the next morning. Just kind of going by, making sure everything was good. My boss, was taking a look at it, and making sure everything was good for the next morning. I was up in the 4-6 at the time. We were pretty far off the concourse, but we were looking at a building over there, and I heard that the job had came over earlier for the theft of the auto, the carjacking by 4 males into a BMW. And then I hear Street Crime Auto, whatever, following suspect vehicle south on the concourse. Immediately diverted what I wanted to do, went right to that because I knew this was going to be bad. The hair on the back of my neck was tingling standing up. And I just had a bad feeling that day. And they're following south on the concourse, and I'm coming north, so I'm coming towards them from a pretty good distance. I had a fight for a while to get to the concourse. And then I hear we're at 182, and another vehicle is going to head on them, and they're going to take down the car. And I'm like, not yet. I said, I'm a few blocks out. Let's, I just felt, having more cars there would be better, but it was already going down. So I scream up there. I see all the cars, but no people. And there's like still some smoke in the air. And I start looking around, figuring out, obviously people are being chased all over the place. And then I realized that Kevin was over on the ground. There was I think he was a 4-0 anti-crime sergeant, was the first one there, and I was right behind him. So I was actually one of the first guys. I was actually probably the first guy from street crime to get to Kevin. And I saw how pale he was, and I knew it wasn't good. And, later on I did some training. I did training for OCCB. And I use this a lot because I was not prepared. I mean, even all my time in street crime, all the guns and all the things we do, when I saw him down on the ground like that, I felt like I froze for a little while. And I can't tell you if it was a second or 10 minutes that I froze. Then I heard the ambulance coming, and I realized, oh, shit, let's get some direct pressure. Let's, see what we can do for him. And we got him up in the ambulance, and I knew at the point we put him in, it was not good. So that was a pretty tough experience for me. And I wish there was video cameras back then, because I'd like to know that I only froze for maybe 5 seconds and then, kind of helped him out. But to this day, I can't tell you how long. Everything just kind of stopped for me when I saw him.
That's understandable, because I think when you look at the severity of his wounds too, I don't think there's much you could have done as it was, because for those of you who don't know,
all internal, nothing, the wound was on the side, so there was no way you're going to get to anything.
Yeah, that was March 14th, 1996. And Kevin stepped out, and like I said earlier, as soon as he stepped out on the traffic stop, boom, 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 the shots rang out. The bullet hit Kevin. He had a vest on, but it hit him right in the armpit, traveled down, and severed all those organs, and he died at the hospital, that night. And that was terrible. I remember, actually, I think Howard Stern actually put some money together for the family, had a fundraiser which got a lot of money, and that helped him out big time. And of the 3 perps that were tried for that, I know one of them chickened out and committed suicide in jail. And I don't really care what happened to the other 2. I guess they got convicted. Who cares? But that terrible night. Good guy gone too soon, man. Like I said, had started out rough in life, but gotten himself together. Was he a Marine too? I think he was a Marine.
Yes, he was a Marine.
He was a Marine, and then he comes to the housing police first, then the NYPD, and loses his life in the line of duty that night. He's not forgotten, though. He's not forgotten.
But again, something that kind of in my head, got me leaning more towards my my tactics training later in the job too. That something like that happened, and it's like, you start thinking, what could have been done to avoid this? How can we do it different? You start analyzing some of those things.
And something, 96 was another violent year for you guys, because in 96 there was Kevin first. Vinny Giudice also gets killed in the Bronx. He wasn't shot. This guy was having a fight with his girlfriend, shoves Vinny into the mirror, cuts his leg, cuts an artery. He bleeds out. And I think that happened in the 5-0, the confines of the 5-0, if I'm not mistaken. I know it was in the Bronx. Then you get Lieutenant Narvaez, who was shot and killed in October of 96. Brian Jones 5 days later after Narvaez. And then to round out the year, Charlie Davis is shot and killed in December of 96 as well. So that was another really violent year for the NYPD, unfortunately.
Yeah. That was a tough one. But that one stayed with me a long time. Obviously, it'll be with me forever.
No, of course. And I'm sorry you had to go through that night. And I think, at that point, silver linings, there's always a silver lining can be found in any bad situation, at least I believe. You had 11 years on the job by that time when Kevin was killed. You could turn around and, as you said, use that experience to say, okay, this happened to me. I don't want it to happen to you. But if you find yourself in this situation, here's what I think you need to do. And who's to say that hasn't helped not only when these shootings have happened, but that's also helped prevent some of these shootings from happening if, there's the means to stop. And maybe that's because of your tactics.
Yeah. And definitely, we definitely are lacking sometimes in tactics. We work so hard that we don't train enough.
Yeah, that's true.
And everyone thinks, the good thing for NYPD is there's so many of us that we could have so many on the scene so fast that we can get away with a lot of things that other departments can't. Because sometimes in numbers you can overwhelm a situation. But a lot of guys think because we do so much that we don't need to train. There's absolutely a lot of room for training out there.
No, that's true. And Tommy Brennan, the late Tommy Brennan, longtime veteran of the FDNY said this, and he was talking about the fire service, but you can apply the same saying to the police service. You can never learn enough about a job that can kill you, is the quote. And that's so true, because I've said this numerous times. You don't even have to go down to one PP. Every precinct that you go to in the city has a memorial wall for their officers who have been killed in the line of duty. So just take one good look at that, no matter where you are. And that's all you need to know about how quickly things can turn on this job on a dime, and how quickly you can end up on that wall if you don't follow proper tactics.
Yeah. And that's kind of what led to the expansion of street crime. When I got there in '88, we went in as new guys. It was only a couple of us new at a time. We'd jump in cars with other people, and we'd ride with them for a little while till we partner up with somebody. But while we were partnered up with them, we were learning the ways that they did things. And these guys were methodical, and they did good work, and they were used a lot of tactics, especially that B squad with Sergeant Taboris. I mean, he really had those guys working together, and safety was his goal all the time. And that again, I have a lot of experience from there, where we where I learned a lot there of what the teamwork, what you can do as a team, and I'm not going to say every street crime unit worked that way, but his team definitely worked that way. And but the other thing I want to mention about the training is that's what ultimately led to the demise, because they brought in all these guys at once, and that was the end of us as detectives. So the merge was just announced that they were going to pick up all these new guys. So the 20 detectives, the deal they made is they're going to give them back to the detective bureau, because the detective bureau is short, but they're going to get all these new people coming in.
You just inherited hang on a second. You just inherited the detective bureau of 2 departments, housing and transit, and you're short?
Yeah. So when they picked up all these people, that was kind of our death sentence as the detectives there. So they took us out. They said pick a squad. And like I said, I told you I did some time in the squad in the 7-3. I did the RIP, and I was in the squad for a little while, and it really wasn't my thing. So when they said pick a squad, I said, you know what? I have some friends over in the 104. I'm going to go back and work with them. They were up in the squad over there. And I said, you know what? I got some good experienced guys. I'm going to go work with them and learn from them. And by the time it all came and got done, one guy had a heart issue, retired. The other 2 guys went to homicide. Now I get there. There's one guy left that I kind of knew, that I was looking to work with. And eventually we did work together. So I was doing regular cases there when I first got there, which was whatever came in. And there wasn't a lot of priority stuff going on then, because now you're into the, 97, 98, where everything was really, really kind of cleaned up. So that place was really quiet. But I worked myself back into a gig there. Back to what I know, back to burglaries. They had a spot for a burglary detective, and me and my partner, Billy Ingerson, we took all the burglary cases, because there were a lot of them. And we were debriefing perps, and we were getting them to admit, learning the patterns, learning what was going on, and based on what we had, I'd be able to shake these guys down and tell them, I know you did this one, and we're going to hammer you. And I would get them to make statements and incriminate themselves, tell me where they sold property, where they did these things. And then we were locking these guys up for, 6-7 burglaries at a time.
You get it out of me pretty quickly.
My happy place, doing something I liked.
You get it out of me pretty quickly if I was in that position. Before you even say something, all you'd have to go do is something to the effect of, and I'd say, I know he did it, and I did this one, and I could tell you a whole crew.
Oh yeah, and I let them play and let them go for a little while, let them tell their bullshit stories. Careful. And I'll say, what about this house on this street? So we had this one guy, and we took him out, and we drove him around, and he pointed out 8 houses, and he told me pretty much piece by piece what he took out of all these houses right off the complaint reports. And we took him down on that. So I was back kind of doing something that I enjoyed.
Real quick, you said something, about it being cleaned up 97, 98. And, like I said, street crime officially went the way of the dinosaur in 2002. Do you feel partially it was because, think about where New York was by 2002. It was pretty cleaned up. The homicide rates were dropping, crime rates as a whole were dropping, to where Kelly might have looked around and said, you know what? For as good as these guys did, we really don't need them anymore.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, but you know what it is? They want numbers from you, and
That
if the
too,
crime's
yeah.
not out there to give you the numbers, these guys are out there tripping on each other, trying to find things. But they got away from the robberies too. They became gun crazy, and some people will tell me, I probably shouldn't say that, but they took it too far. And then after maybe there was a point they needed it in there.
Yeah.
But now let's go back. Let's start looking at the robberies. Let's start looking at more of the violent crimes.
Have a balance.
Not concentrating so much on the guns themselves.
Yeah, have a balance.
But now they have a new guy coming in, and you just got transferred in from this precinct, and he just got transferred from this precinct, and you're working together in a borough that you never even worked in. So what do you know? What's your experience in that area? And how quick can you really get up and running, giving them, their arrests every month that they want?
Yeah. If you have guys that don't know the area, it can lead to tragic outcomes. Because remember, it wasn't just Diallo in 99. Dorismond happened the next year. I'm not saying that was street crime, but I think at that point, after 99 with Diallo and then Dorismond the next year in 2000, Kelly, I can understand him coming in and saying, let me get out ahead of this before the next one happens, and, kind of led to the dissolution of it. And that said, I guess moving it along, you were in the gang unit for a time too, and another interesting place for you to be, another interesting way to work, because it all blends together. The robberies on the street, of course, any kind of gun running, of course, they're doing that too. And you guys, even though, yes, you can call emergency in to do the warrants for you, it's not always the case. You're going in on these guys yourselves. You're building these cases. These guys are, most of them at least, some of them are softies that are hiding behind the label of the gang. Some of them are willing to die for their cause. And you got to be real careful, because you kick down that door, they're ready for you and they want the fight. So tell me about proper tactics on a raid and also building the cases against these guys.
All right. Yeah, that was, well, from the gang unit. Originally, I was assigned to the Detective Bureau gang unit, because from the 104, I was doing the burglaries. I don't know if you remember, back then there was this group, they were going around, and they were hitting all like the big pharmacies, and they would drive a stolen car through the front gate. They'd have another car with a bunch of garbage pails in the trunk, and they would fill up these garbage pails with cases of cigarettes, jump back in that stolen car and take off. And it was a big thing. They were hitting in Queens, they were hitting in Manhattan. So I got pulled out of the 104 to join a task force to go after these guys. Most of them were from the 9-4 in Brooklyn. And we had some guys identified. So they had pulled me back, but it was me, another detective, and a sergeant. So it was three of us working this thing. And, sometimes, people have things to do and they don't want to work midnights. And that's when these guys are hitting. So every time we had something going on and someone couldn't work that midnight, we had to switch our shift because we had no supervision. These guys would hit, and I was getting frustrated as hell there. But we ended up identifying about 13 people. I had actually made an observation. We were driving around the 104 one night because we knew there was an area over there where these guys frequented. And I actually spotted one of the perps driving a stolen car, because they were stealing these, like, back then it was like these Pontiac Bonnevilles that they can just crack the ignition, pull a little gear in there, and they can drive it away. And I look, and he drives by me, and I'm like, oh shit, that's so-and-so. Tell my partner. By the time I turn around, no names. I turn around and he takes off. So we end up from the 104 chasing him all the way down. We lost him down in the 103 somewhere. But I was able to arrest him later on the identification of him in the stolen car. And then got him to turn on a lot of his buddies. And if we didn't completely kill them, we started a little infighting between them about who was ratting people out and who was doing this. So we took down a few bodies on that. He gave us a lot of information. We took down a bunch of guys and kind of stopped those incidents from going down. So with that, we lost our supervisor. He got transferred. And they're like, what are we going to do with these guys that are working this case? So they moved me to the gang unit because they had a sergeant that could supervise us. Finish the case there, and then they said, "Would you like to stay? We're in this gang unit." And there was more gang intelligence stuff. Like we'd go out whenever there was crimes. We had information on all the suspects. We kept information on the suspects. We dealt with intel a lot on what they had. Learned a lot about the gang tattoos. What these guys did. What all the colors were. So we really started responding to all these incidents and getting information. And we really developed a lot of information. And really. Louis Savelli, who was a sergeant in street crime when I went back as a detective, street crime had a little gang unit called the Cage Unit before NYPD had a gang unit. So this one sergeant from the 7-2 was running this gang thing out of street crime while I was back there as a detective. And so I got to meet him. And so I learned a lot about gangs while I was there, kind of talking with him. And then they made a big gang unit over over him, and they out supervised them, and they had all these other guys telling them what to do. Meanwhile, he was the guy who knew the gangs inside out.
Dermot Shea even ran later on, the bigger one. I think he even ran the gang unit for a while before he made his way up through the ranks.
So I'm under the Detective Bureau. We're doing, more intel stuff. And then they move us under OCCB. All right. We kind of called it a hostile takeover. We got taken by OCCB. Wasn't a bad thing for me. Originally, I thought it was going to be great because I thought, we'd be able to, more go after these guys rather than just, get information and intelligence. And, I wanted to do more casework, things like that. But when they first formed the gang unit, there was like a patrol part of it, a narcotics part of it, and a detective part of it. And we all kind of worked in the same place. But, we got stuck doing different things, and, everyone wasn't happy with what they were doing. And it was a little tough in the beginning to get going there. Yeah.
Is that why you retired eventually in 05? Because by that point you had 20 years.
No, actually that's probably 99, 98, 99 I went there.
Yeah.
So then I go to the range one day, and old partner from, guy from my team from street crime is a sergeant down at the range. And he says, listen, I'm getting picked up by this unit in OCCB to do tactical training. Are you interested? And at the time, Chief Morange, who was my captain in street crime, was the chief of OCCB. So he's like, I want to bring some guys back. I want to change these tactics. Guys are, getting hurt out there. And Jim Hart, who was doing this tactical training thing up at the range, really had a really good method of doing, warrants and searches. And it was a good concept. And he worked with me. He said, so listen, he said, you want to come on board with this? I said, absolutely. So I'm at the range in my crappy T-shirt, jeans. He said, all right, they're doing interviews today at 1PP. Head over there right now. I said, this is all I got. He goes, don't worry, I'll call ahead. I'll tell him that's all you got. So I went over there, and who was the XO of OCCB at that time was Chief Matarazzo. So I saw him there, and there's all these guys sitting outside his office in suits waiting to go in. And they called me in first. I went in, and I walked out, and I pretty much had my spot from there. So I got transferred over to the OCCB Training Bureau. It was called TIERS at the time, Training Investigative Review Section. So they were doing the thing. But we were going to start a whole new search warrant thing because they were building the new TAC house up in the Bronx. So we were going to be assigned to the range, work out of the TAC house, and we're doing all the tactical training now. So we're going to do search warrant training, vehicle takedowns, undercover extractions. Those are some of the things we implemented. And we really changed the way OCCB did their warrants. from 2001 when I got there, actually 2000, the end of 2000 to 2005 when I retired, not a single OCCB cop was injured on a search warrant from any kind of gunfire situation. And we're taking guns like, crazy and drugs, but there were no shooting incidents the whole time that we were running this unit, and for years after. So what we were doing was working.
Absolutely, I concur. As many a sticker on many a locker says, and you go to any precinct, it's probably there. Proper tactics save lives.
So we were doing a simunitions program, which I don't know if you're familiar with simunitions. It's a soap bullet.
Mm-hmm.
It fires out of the regular guns, but at least when you have an interaction, if you're doing something wrong and you're getting shot, we can kind of teach you to fix it and say, all right, listen, you can't stand out in the middle of the street and trade shots with these people. Try doing this or that. I have a lot of guys, they step around the corner of a building and there's a guy there drawing a gun on them and they stand there and they shoot back at them. And I'm like, well, where did you just come from? Around the corner of the building. Well, if you take 2 steps back here and shoot from around the corner, you're not going to get hit. So we started looking at a lot of things like that, a lot of angles. Started looking more. We looked at warrants in the opposite direction. Like everyone's like, what can we do to the bad guy? We looked at it as how can the bad guy hurt us? And how can we develop tactics to not let him do that? So that was kind of our mindset for what we were doing. And we just built off of that. And we trained all the OCCB guys Monday to Thursday. But Friday we had downtime and we went in there and we experimented with all these things. And we had different people in there. And when we tried different things, if you're getting shot by the guy that's in there, obviously something's not working.
Right.
But if you can go through, do a search warrant with a couple of people hiding in the building and not get shot, then you're really, really doing it. And that's kind of what got us going. And we went, and then a couple months later, I get a call from another guy we know. He said, listen, I'm setting up a company. He goes, I got an offer to do search warrant training for the Counter Drug Training Center in Pennsylvania. They're firing the guys that are currently doing the thing because they're not happy with their tactics. Can you guys go in and do 2 classes? They have booked already. So Jim Hart, who's my sergeant now for OCCB, was my partner. It was in my team in street crime, and myself originally went to work for this guy. And we got that from jump. We took over. We did the 2 classes. We were rated like 100% from all the cops in the class. People were saying some of the greatest tactics they've ever seen in their lives. And some of the people in the class had former military experience and pretty, some special ops guys that were like, wow, this is like groundbreaking stuff, and ended up training out there for over 20 years.
Wow.
So my last 5 years, while I'm doing it in OCCB, I'm also teaching it up in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin at this Northeast Counter Drug. And we trained all the cops from the Northeast region, from Virginia to Wisconsin, all the way up to Maine. It was a congressionally funded training thing that was kind of run through the National Guard. We trained on military bases. All the cops that came in got trained for free. They paid for the cops' training. They paid the cops lodging and meals while they were there. So for me, that's a win-win. I'm getting to train cops my technique, and the cops aren't even paying to come see it. So again, the right place, something lined up, and we have another new unit. And then eventually in 2007, Jim Hart formed a company and asked me to partner up with him when we took over the training from 2007. Well, actually, he's still running it today. I retired in 2020 from doing that. I don't know, something about a 50-something-year-old guy walking through telling these young guys how to move through hallways and stuff. But you know what? I thought about leaving it a few times because I'm like, I'm retired now, say 15 years. And I'm like, how relevant is what I'm teaching? But the feedback from the students, like how much they really enjoyed it and really, really said it worked, is what kept me in it.
Yeah.
And after 20 years of doing that, I said, you know what? That's kind of enough.
And you know what it is, though, at the same time, is that I remember telling this to one of my buddies from emergency, Carl Duenzel, who's as an instructor now in retirement. That knowledge, I would hate, and this goes for any kind of first responder work, I would hate to see that knowledge leave with that person out the door and then they just keep it to themselves and don't share it. If there's a way that you can share it, even in an informal setting like this one, where maybe there's a member of the service listening tonight that can pick up on some of the things that you said, share that by all means, get it out there, write it down, talk about it. Because listen, it doesn't, I mean, listen, do things evolve over time? Yes, they do. Obviously, from what it was when you first started teaching in 2000 to what it is now in 2022, it has changed. But the core of it, I feel, is still the same, which is get the bad guys off the street, but do it safely.
Yeah. So I actually got to do the 80-hour ESU course. Being that I was doing the OCCB training, we had actually worked something out where we were going to go through their course, and then some of those guys come through ours. Of course, we went through theirs, and when it was their turn to come through ours, their ESU, they don't have to go through our training. But you know what? They could have picked up a lot from it.
I think so.
I had an opportunity while I was up doing that training to go against 3 different Delta teams. And they said that we were by far the best unit they ever went against, military or law enforcement.
Wow.
So that's a pencil in my, in our hat. And and they were serious about it too. We tagged them up pretty good in a couple of incidents, and they did their job on us. We were the bad guys. We were supposed to die, but they were surprised, how much damage we could do, kind of back on them and what our mindset is. So we started in deep conversation about tactics and what we do and why we do it. And they were asking, and that's really the question. It's not what you do, it's why you do it, knowing what to do at each time.
Right. And because the thing is, in these situations, you have to, in order to catch a bad guy, you got to think like a bad guy. If I was a perp, I'm sure you said this in your head many times, if I was a perp, what would I do here? Oh, I would go for this. I would do this. And it's scary to think that way. But when people who don't want to go to jail see the cops coming for them, they get desperate. And these are the things they'll resort to in order to not go back.
Yeah. Where are they going to go? They're going to go hide where a little kid plays hide and seek is going to go. I mean, there are only so many places you can hide in the house.
Exactly.
But if you take things down methodically and work your way through it,
right,
you can do pretty well.
I mean, and again, normal people would look at this and say, well, why would somebody do something like that? But then again, these are not normal people. I think, what? There was a story I was reading about a criminal in Australia. He's since dead, and that's a good thing. His name was Nick Radev. And Australia was having a real serious gang war in the late 90s, early 2000s, and he was shot 7 times in the head and chest in 2003. They said he used to put his guns in his baby daughter's crib, hide it right underneath. You know what? And a normal person will look at that and say, what kind of monster? Again, like I said, these aren't normal people.
Yeah. So we were doing like when we were doing the warrants for OCCB, if our guys had something that they felt was over their heads, they would call us up. And so we were kind of like the OCCB 18 there for a little while. We'd come in and do it for them if they didn't have enough manpower or they felt it was, too much. So my team would go up there and do that. I got so comfortable with this. I actually asked before the department had cameras, could I wear cameras during these warrants? Because I wanted to show the guys what my team was doing while we were going through there. We actually got denied back then. They thought the cameras were going to get us into trouble. And I knew the cameras were going to get us out of trouble.
It's helping guys and gals across the country now.
Yeah. I know personal experiences from, people I know that have gotten off because they had the cameras on.
Yeah, and it works both ways. If somebody screws up and does something that should get them fired, then put that footage out there because you don't want that person on the job. But it works. It's a two-way street. While it works for that purpose too, it also works like we just said. People are saying, I don't know about this. Well, look at the footage. This is why we did what we did. So I feel like the more they invest in those cameras, the better. It's for everybody's safety. It's a two-pronged thing. If you're doing the right thing, don't worry about it. Gotcha. Yeah. So there you go. There you go. And this brings us now. Now you see. Now I'm going to have to tune you up. We had a fun, easy hour 25. Now it's time for the rapid fire. 5 hit and run questions from me. 5 hit and run answers from you. Are you ready?
I will give it my best.
You could say pass if you want. First, favorite neighborhood to work in, especially given the fact that street crime was citywide.
I love Midtown Manhattan. I was in my element there. I knew what I was doing, and I knew the right people were there. I loved working Midtown.
I don't blame you. Great place to work. Second, funniest colleagues you ever
13,
worked with.
13 years at the New Year's Eve detail by choice.
Not a bad detail to have either.
Yeah.
Second, funniest colleagues you ever worked with.
You know what? We've had a lot of laughs at work. With cops, sometimes with perps. We've had perps that we treated our, people say the cops are mean, they're this and that. We would be driving down, taking the guys to central booking. We would be hysterical in the car, holding our stomachs, joking with these guys, trying to lighten up the mood. I mean, they're in a bad situation, but, we would mess around with these guys, and some guys would be pretty good with it. And, I don't know. I worked with a lot of guys, but I was always kind of on the serious end. But we used to get some laughs in when we were driving around, going down to court.
I don't know. I don't doubt it, especially in a city like New York. There's a lot of serious things that go on, but there's also a lot of hilarious things that go on too.
Mm-hmm.
Third, I'm gonna tweak this question a little bit in correspondence with my man Joe in the chat. Happiest day on the job.
Happiest day. I think getting my detective shield, fairly early on was a big accomplishment for me. I thought that was a good thing back then.
Yeah, that makes sense. Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City, past or present.
Oof. Well, my wife will kill me if I don't say this one. It would have to be past. It would have to be Kate Cassidy's in Woodhaven, because I met her there.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't blame her for suggesting that. And I'm sure the food was great there too. And thank you, by the way, in advance to Mrs. Ficken for letting me steal your husband for tonight. I've enjoyed it immensely. Fifth and finally, anybody coming on the job now, especially now, and if they're going into a unit like the new revamped version of street crime they have out there, the neighborhood safety teams, if you can grab a guy or gal that's going into that unit, what would you tell them? What advice would you give them?
I tell my son every day. My son's got 3.5 years on. He's working in Queens. And he's kind of in that situation. And here's what I tell him. I said, in the current environment, work on things with complainants. Work on robberies, work on burglaries, work on assaults. If you have a complainant, you're not the bad guy.
There you go.
Right? You can do whatever you have. If you have a messed up person here who's hurt, robbed, beaten, assaulted, who's going to fault you for grabbing the suspect?
Yeah. You'll have somebody, even if it's just one person, that's glad you did.
Yep.
I think that's sound advice. And on that note,
and that's, and the young guys, you can go out there and you can work. I know some people personally, I got the third generation of my family now out there doing it, and he's doing very well.
Yeah, you can still get it done. You're not always seeing that publicized, but the arrest is not the problem. I think the chief of department, Ken Corey, was putting this out there that, arrests are at an all-time high. There's just other circumstances out of the control of the MOS, which again is not for us to litigate. Yeah, that has things kind of complicated.
The district attorney's office now is not on board. There's
it's a little wompy.
Yeah, issues with how you can control people, who don't want to be controlled. How do you take a guy down without getting on top of him? I don't know. Yeah. I don't think I would want to do that.
Yeah, that's like trying to hit a baseball without a bat.
Yeah.
There you go. So, well, before I wrap it up, Joe Maliga does ask, does your son have your shield?
He does now. Okay. When he first went on the job, there was a female officer in transit that had it. I was promoted detective in 94. So she had it for 18 years. Wow. I was not going to ask her to give it up before she retired. As soon as she retired, she gave it up, and I gave it to him. I called up, and they switched his shield. So he's on his second shield now. And my dad also did have that shield.
Okay, so this is the one he'll stick with until his retirement.
Yep, or he makes detective, and then he can pick my shield or my dad's shield, because
there you go.
We have different detective shields.
There you go. Love it. So before I say goodbye to the audience, is there any shout outs you want to give to anyone or anything?
I just enjoyed doing this, reliving some of these experiences, and hopefully some of the guys, brought back some memories to them. And, good luck to the guys that are out there doing it. Be safe.
Absolutely. Be safe. And thanks to everybody that was in the street crime unit from 71 until 2002. Street crime, we own the night. And Absolutely. That is certainly true. Coming up next on the Mike the New Haven podcast, she's been around in the news industry, a lot of experience, ABC, CBS, So it'll be good to talk with her. Rena Nyman, she's doing her own thing now. She's not too far from me. She's also in Connecticut, so it'll be interesting to speak to somebody from my home state who's had such an expansive career. That's Monday. I'm working to confirm it, but it should be Rena Nyman. I don't have a guest yet for Tuesday. I'm going to try to see who I can get. I'll cook something up. So stay tuned, and hopefully I can bring you a show Tuesday as well. So in the meantime, on behalf of Rich Ficken, this has been the Street Crime Chronicles Volume 2. Like I said, Street Crime, we own the night. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we will see you next time. Rich, stick around. We'll say our goodbyes off the air.